with the second opinion that he definitely has prostate cancer.
Well, welcome. I'm Reggie Hicks, producer of the documentary and outreach project, If You Are My Brothers, and host of this podcast, If You Are My Brothers podcast, Prostate Cancer Conversations. And we want to welcome everyone watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook Live, and also to those listening on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to start out with this. Unfortunately, due to a family emergency, I guess for today's episode, David Moffett is not available to join us. Our thoughts and prayers are with David and his family at this time. So what we decided to do was pivot a little bit and let you, our listeners, viewers, and followers drive the conversation. I have here in my hot little hands some questions from our audience and followers, and I'll try to do the best I can to answer them. But first, as always, a quick reminder, this podcast is not a substitute for your medical team. The opinions and medical issues we discuss are not a replacement for treatment. Always consult your healthcare provider. And remember, some conversations on this podcast are of an adult nature, so please listen accordingly. Um, we call this series Prostate Cancer Conversations, and we invite you to join us in the chat, particularly during this episode when it's just me answering your questions. And with that being said, you can put your questions or comments in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Don't be shy. This is real life. And remember to like, share, and subscribe as we go on this journey together. Now, to learn more about this podcast and the If You Are My Brothers documentary and community engagement project, you can do that by visiting ifyouaremybrothers.org. That's ifyouaremybrothers.org. And so, with that being said and out of the way, I wanted to go ahead and take a moment to go through some of our questions. And this is hot off the press, folks. So unrehearsed, and there's nothing in this that I have seen before. So the first question is, someone wanted to know, you entered this journey as a producer of If You Are My Brothers. How did that role influence your mindset and what you received as a diagnosis? That's a really good question, because before doing the documentary about my fraternity brother Ralph Franklin, I really had no idea of what prostate was. I knew that that was a number that I had on my blood work. I knew that it was normally, I didn't even know what the number meant other than it was a number. So going into it, I didn't really know. Following Ralph, I started to realize this was an important number to know. And also knew that, this number should be around 1. As you get older, it increases. And that was really the reason that I kind of took the opportunity to go to a urologist or to my primary care physician and said, your number's going up a little bit higher than normal. And then going to a urologist and later on having the diagnosis. Now, I clear transparency here. I'm going to tell you that I did go originally. I was like, yeah, well, this would make for good documentary footage, right? I mean, here I am following my fraternity brother who has prostate cancer. And now all of a sudden I am going to at least check on this thing, right? So, 1 out of 4 at the time. Now some statistics say 1 out of 6 African-American men or men of color will be diagnosed or have prostate cancer sometime in their life. So for me, it was just, I'll beat the statistics. So I really did not know what to expect when I did it. But the documentary, I always say to people, the documentary did save my life because it brought attention to this number that was my PSA that always came up on my blood work. I was pretty good about physicals every year, but how that related to my overall health, I had no idea. Um, how did you process the news in terms of your family? work and fraternity community. We're going to be doing the show actually next on the 6th of November, I believe, our next show. We're going to deal with the psychology of prostate cancer. And that is kind of what we as men in particular go through when we are diagnosed. Um, my process was kind of weird. I had followed Ralph around, so I knew the good news was that that cancer was in the prostate. It was slow growing. My numbers were very low. My Gleason score, as many men who have gone through this process know, that kind of Gleason score is kind of a number that kind of tells you just kind of how deep this cancer is in your prostate. And my Gleason score was, not bad. um, but it's just that C word when you hear it for the first time, when you start to process it, you don't. And I always say that it was like listening to the Peanuts parents, they go, wah, 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 wah. That's what I heard when, I got the diagnosis. But I I went through I guess this thing of just getting it out of me, right? But realizing that I had some time, that I could probably do some active surveillance. I came to that conclusion later on, but man, the initial process was I got to get it out. I got to do something. This is cancer. This is serious. And that's kind of what I did initially. But I think having the information when I settled down and started realizing what this what prostate cancer was and what it could be, understanding that Ralph had a very aggressive form of prostate cancer and he was still doing fine at the time. I kind of just sat back and said, okay, all right, I think let me think about what I can do. Let me go to my physician and ask if surveillance was a good thing for me to do at the time. That would give me an opportunity to get these different things on tape, right? And be a part of the documentary, which it turned out to be. So I think for most men, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks, kind of what the process is, what you go through. Some men internalize it. I know some men I've talked to that waited months almost to tell anybody in their family. They just kept this burden with them throughout the process. So anyway, that's how I kind of got through it. And then say, at what point did you decide to share your story publicly instead of keeping it private? Uh, well, I didn't having done a doing a documentary at the time, right? And seeing how Ralph was so transparent and so honest about his situation, I don't think it ever really entered my mind that I would do anything but publicize it. Yeah, I mentioned before that I even thought, you know, going through the process of a biopsy and showing that was just for me to be, in the video, in the documentary, just to say, okay, man, when you go through this, you gotta at least, get a biopsy if the doctor says you need one. Not really ever thinking that I would have a diagnosis. And having the camera in the room at the time, you see it at the beginning of the documentary, that is actual footage. That is the doctor, the urologist saying to me he has prostate cancer. And he said it he has because not that I wasn't in the room, but my wife was there with me. And he really kind of focused on her. I think he kind of saw the stress in her face and kind of wanted to reassure her that things were going to be okay. I was kind of like in my own space at the time. Um, but yeah, that I never really thought about keeping it private. Again, that's something we're going to talk about next on our next show. Why men keep it private. Why men, and I did. I saw some men that wouldn't even talk in the, we'd be in the waiting room and they would have nothing to say to me as I was explaining to them. I said, oh, well, well, I'm here and this is my situation. And they just kind of nod. One guy whose wife was talking to us at the time in the waiting room about what he was going through, he basically, grabbed her by the arm and took her out, like, I don't talk to anybody about it. And I don't want to talk about it. So as men, we kind of go through, that process. But no, I knew that doing the documentary, there was no way that I was not going to make it public, especially when the diagnosis was on tape in real time. When reviewing treatment options, how did you choose your path, and what felt unique to this situation? The uniqueness of the situation was simply this: I had decided early on I was going to, when I wanted to take action, once I knew I had prostate cancer, my first thing was I need to get it out. And the first thing that was available to me were the radioactive seed implants. I was all tuned up to go through that and do that. And I think the Lord I had other plans for me because I didn't have insurance. I was self-pay. The deal about paying for this thing kind of fell through. And so at that point, I just stopped. I took a breath, said a prayer, and said, let me really look at my options. And if I'm able to share that with other men in the documentary, then somebody else may, this may help them make their decision. And so I really was diligent about going to proton therapy facilities. At that time, the only one on the East Coast was in Jacksonville, Florida, at the University of Florida. So I went there, spent a whole day there. I looked at prostecision. I looked at brachytherapy, which is freezing the prostate. I did all of the research, met with all the doctors, and then even on camera sat down at our kitchen table with my wife, and we talked about what would be the treatment. And I think that's so very important. I've said this on this show so a number of times. If you have a significant other, involve them from the beginning, because this is a journey you both will take. This is a journey that will have an effect on your relationship. We're going to talk about that in a couple of weeks, about how mentally we deal with some of the side effects that you get from prostate cancer treatment, no matter what treatment you decide to make or to do. So yeah, I just, my situation was unique in that. I think again the documentary drove a lot of that initially, but I was so happy that when I sat down and decided what I wanted to do, and which interestingly enough was that having it removed was at the bottom of my list. I mean, the minute somebody said to me I had to wear a catheter for a week, I'm like, I ain't doing that. But when I thought about it and I researched, the thing that really kind of drove it home was, what if something happens? What if there's a reoccurrence? If there is a reoccurrence, I can at least have other options. One being radiation, because there's nothing is 100%. And the next questions kind of deal with that, because as I mentioned to you all before, I did have a reoccurrence earlier this year. My PSA started going up very gradually, and nothing ever showed up on any of the PSMA scans, but it was going up enough that there was concern that there were cancer cells in my prostate bed. And so the option I had were at the time I could have hormone therapy, I could do proton therapy or radiation, or I could do a combination of both. So again, radiation was an option, and it was the right decision for me to have made back some 11, 12 years ago. And I just, thank God that, you know, that's the way I was kind of driven towards that particular treatment. But that's to say everybody's different. The treatment part, I think, is just your personal, where you are and your age, and what what you feel of the risk or side effects. And again, a decision that should be made with your significant other or members of your family, I think, just to give you some comfort. um it says here, in week 1 of proton therapy, what were the early days like? Now, I just mentioned that I had a reoccurrence. I did opt to do proton therapy, which is different than photon. So I did proton radiation at the Emory Proton Center here in Atlanta. It is now the second Proton Center on the East Coast. And luckily, it's not hundreds of miles away, but a 20-minute drive. Um, and I decided to do that without the hormone therapy, which kind of is a shot in the dark in a way. I mean, you really don't know where it is, but you think, all the docs said this is probably where the issue is with the prostate cancer, the cells being there, and that's the area we decided to go ahead and treat. And I had blogged on ifyouaremybrothers.org. If you go to the website, I have a blog there, and I kind of go day by day, not day by day, but first couple of days, and in the first 10 days, there were 37 treatments. Yeah, 37 consecutive, but not on the weekends. So I did get a break. Um, and I blog about that experience, about physically what I went through, mentally what I went through, the conversations I had, the relationships I made at the time. So if you go to ifyouaremybrothers.org and click on the blog at the top, you can read my story. One thing that's unique to that story is that for every session, I did have a song or an artist that I would ask the technicians to play. 'Cause that was kind of the thing. You played music while you were kind of going along each session, which lasted about 7 to 8 minutes. And I'm putting together now a Spotify playlist of all of the artists that I listen to. I will say it's kind of started because the rooms are color coded, and my first proton treatment was in the purple room. So I guess you could probably guess what artist I chose for that first time. Yes, Prince. So I listened to Prince during my treatment, and then that kind of sparked a sort of musical theme for each and every day of the 37 days I was there. And technicians kind of got into it. They were like, okay, what are we doing today? What are we doing today? Um, so that was sort of my experience with the recurrence. I do have an appointment in a while to see where we are, to hopefully see that everything is okay. So I'll be putting that in the blog as well, and we'll be talking about that on the show. So, how did you cope with aspects of the journey you could not control? Side effects, scheduling, outcomes. Um, hmm. That's a good question. eh, what can you do, right? I think for me, having been a part of the documentary and Ralph's story, I understood there were some things you just couldn't control. Even now, with the proton therapy, for me, I there's nothing I can control about whether or not this is successful and will cure me a second time. But I have a very strong spiritual faith that I rely on, and I think that has helped definitely get me through this situation where you don't have controls over side effects, you don't have controls over the outcomes at all, and I think that's important. The other part is having a community, and that's what this podcast is all about. You are our community. We are in this together. So as you listen to my story, as you listen to other stories, as we have docs on and treatment options and all of the new innovations and things that we have lined up, this is an opportunity for you to sit in a room. You can engage us if you like, even this evening, or you can engage us later on, like a lot of the questions that you're hearing tonight. But the whole thing is for you to be engaged by what we do with this particular project. And so I want to thank everybody for chiming in. Sometimes, we don't want to do stuff in real time and put stuff up on the show, but that's okay. That's all right. We'll get through some of these. Um, what side effects surprised you the most and how did you manage them? Well, I can tell you right now, the side effect for me was the ED. Uh, just being fully transparent, I had no issues. I'd never taken a little blue pill in my life. Even well into my 50s, there were no issues. The doc, because of that, didn't expect there to be any issues coming out of this, but there were. And that to me was probably the most surprised that I was. I mean, the incontinence, I kind of had a little bit of that going in, so I wasn't really surprised about that. But yeah, that ED, when it never did get really back to where I was something that my I had to manage and my wife had to manage. So we managed it together. Um, and I know that for a lot of us, that's how we measure our manlyhood and that kind of thing. But I always try to put it in perspective. I think that I've been able to have a very healthy uh, sexual life with my partner, and we have moved on. And there are things you can do. So there are things that are available. So, the pill and shots and a whole lot of stuff that you can do. And we talked a little bit about that during our last episode. If you haven't, go back and look at our last episode with Dr. Samino. And she talks about a lot of the different options that are out there available. One thing I will say is don't let that scare you, because again, as we say on this show, life over libido, right? I mean, it's all about your being around. I'm so blessed to be around for my granddaughter that was born 6 weeks ago. And had I not been able to, if I had I not addressed this issue, I may not have been here. So, you've got to take a lot into consideration outside of this whole manhood thing. And that's something I know that David Moffett, who is going to be here this evening, really preaches when he's out there doing his advocacy work. And we're going to talk about that once we get him on. And it says, did your experience align or differ from the If You Are My Brothers conversation about ED and incontinence? No, I mean, it's pretty much a side effect or a risk. And I kind of got through that. Let's see. What is your new normal today? What changed? What stayed? What evolved? Well, it's very simple. We talked about the ED issue. I've talked on the show before about having to wear a pad. Just as protection, I can get to the bathroom. I have no issues at night. I'm not wet in the bed, anything like that. But I think as you get older, that's the case anyway. And so it does give me a level of protection. So that's something that's just become a part of my life every day. I mean, I just know that that's what I have. And I often worry about going through security. You got this pad on. It's like, okay. And I've only had one time where I got like searched. And I had to explain to them what it was. But after flying a whole lot of times, that was just that one time. So that always kind of comes to mind. But that's my new norm. Um, the ED we deal with, that's a new norm. And but being here, being alive, being healthy, and hopefully after these treatments being cancer free, that's a norm as well. And that's the one I'm focusing on. Um, how does it feel to shift from storyteller to subject in your own story? It's kind of weird. I am not one to be in front of the camera, or in this case, in front of the mic. It was never my intention, obviously, to be a part of what was going on here. It was a little difficult in a way, just to, I don't know, just to kind of make that switch and also, focus on what Ralph was going through. But I think the one thing that kind of drove me to get through it was that this was going to be a good message for men who were going through it. This was going to be a good story in a sense of you had two men on different paths dealing with this disease very differently. One caught it at a later stage and more aggressive, and one who caught it at a early and at a slower stage, and then you could see kind of, what we both went through. Um, did How did publicly sharing your story affect your relationship personally and professionally? Uh, that's a good question. I don't know if anybody, uh, not not personally, I don't think, but I did have a person that is going to be interviewing me in a couple of weeks that she and I worked together who said to me, you never told me you had prostate cancer. And I was like, oh, I didn't? It's like, no, I never knew. I mean, it came out later when you were doing this other stuff, but I never knew that you were a survivor at the time. And I was surprised because it's somebody I stay pretty close to and in touch with. And I didn't know. And then that made me think about how many people don't know. And not because I hadn't wanted to tell them. I guess, things just happen to where people don't know, and a lot more people do know because of this project, which is fine by me, obviously. But it also reminded me how easy it is for us to kind of keep this to ourselves, how easy it is not to share, how easy it is not to become a part of this prostate cancer community. I met a friend of mine, not met, but I saw a friend of mine over the weekend. I mentioned what I was doing and the project, and he said to me, "Oh, yeah, we um, we definitely went through the same thing." So I was like, he said, "I went through the same thing." I was like, "Okay, I never knew that." He never said anything, but I think once men know, then you find other men to say, "Oh yeah, I had that," or "My uncle had that," or "My dad had that," and kind of talk about the experience. Um, So, what legacy do you hope this journey and project will leave behind? I just hope that if one person, and I can say that more than one person has become or heard the story, read the story, listened to the story, saw the story, and decided to find out what was going on with their prostate health. And on several occasions, they were diagnosed and it was caught early. So the legacy is simply, and I think David Moffett, when he comes on, will talk about this as well. Advocacy, when you're a survivor, is just about helping others to survive. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's why we're here. That's why Danny's in the background, hopefully making all of this happen. So, you know, it's all about saving lives. It's all, and at the end of the day, if it's not caught early, if it's aggressive, if it's gotten out of the prostate, it's very, very difficult to, not very, but it is difficult. It's difficult to can't become cancer free once it metastasizes, like any cancer, right? So the legacy is simply someone watching this even 10 years from now, just like, prostate cancer, and hopefully 10 years from now, they'll be watching this in archive because prostate cancer will have been eradicated and there'll be, a cure. That is the legacy I'm hoping to leave, is just that these are archival footage and data and stuff that people can listen and say, oh yeah, back in the day when prostate cancer was an issue. So that's what we're all striving for. In the meantime, though, to save as many lives as possible, especially among men of color who tend to die from this disease more than any other group. And the final question, like I said, we're not going to be too long today. If you could speak to your pre-diagnosis self today, what would you say? What would I say to I would, you know what? I think I would say a couple of things. One is to find out if prostate cancer was in the family, and to really, really go and dig deep to see where it is. It was caught early enough that I can't say it wasn't monitored early because I was diagnosed in my early 50s. But I think that would be one of it. The other thing I think would be um, to be more like the Kegel exercises and excuse me, the things that we do before and after um, treatment to be more about doing that, more dedicated, and just staying on top of that and getting in shape, staying in shape. Um, that would be the only that would be the thing, be healthy. Do whatever you can to be as healthy as you can. Um, so I think that's kind of what I would say. Um, and sometimes I say, and don't go see Ralph at the Panera Bread and ask him, him to let me chronicle his journey because this is how this whole thing started, right? This is why I'm talking to you today. This is why we have a website. This is why we do community engagement. So yeah, maybe I was like, okay, so maybe I just like I get to just kind of like not able to do this, but no, I'm just joking. It is it's an honor, privilege. I am blessed to still be here, and hopefully, as you listen to the things that we have in store for you coming down the pike, you will become a part of our community. So I want to thank you, everyone, for sending in your comments, your questions. I hope we were able to give you some insight and maybe help some folks with who may have had similar questions. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, remember that we are taking this journey together. And if this episode resonated with you, please share it um, with a loved one and like it and subscribe. And you can contact us via email, social media, and even regular old, as my wife likes to call it, and that most postal service workers hate, snail mail. You can also listen to the podcast at ifyouaremybrothers.org. Again, that's ifyouaremybrothers.org. Thank you, Danny, for bringing that up. Um, you can sign up for our e-newsletter. You can reach out to us. You can listen to archived of our audio and I think video as well. Or you can at least go to our YouTube channel and watch us, but you can also listen to our audio version at the website. And something else you can do at the website is make a contribution because If Me Are My Brothers is a nonprofit 501c3 project dedicated to prostate cancer awareness and health action. That's what we like to call it, actually doing something. And we hope you will support us in what we do. And I think if Danny's ready, he's got a slide somewhere that'll give you all of our giving options. So, and if you're listening to the podcast, the link to give is in our show notes. There you go. Thank you, Danny. So you can see, you can also scan the QR code and it'll send you to a link. You can visit our website, ifyouaremybrothers.org. You can mail us a check. The address is there as well. I want to remind you that when you do make a contribution, you can use Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover. It's really easy. You can also do what we like to call reoccurring contributions. So if you want to do $5 a month or $10 a month, you can do that as well. It's very, very easy for you to make a contribution. And when you do make a contribution, we do have some thank you gifts. I just found out, thanks to an organization, a company called Atlanta Brand Central, and they do a lot of promotional kinds of things like T-shirts and cups and pins, and it's minority owned by a brother named Daryl Armstrong, who has really been doing great work in the community, and he has donated our newest coffee mug that we will be sending out to all of our donors. So if you make a contribution, you will definitely get the If You're My Brother's mug. Now, this is the old one. It's in black and white, but the new one we got coming up is going to be in color. So it's going to be a collector's item. Also, if you see in the background here, there's a painting. This painting is done by a renowned artist that lives right here in Atlanta, Cecil Bernard. Cecil has donated this particular print. It's going to be framed, by the way, really nice. We're giving that away If you reach out to us and in any fashion, form or fashion, because we got to know who you are. If you send us your email, if you register for our e-newsletter, or if you make a contribution, your name will go in the hopper. And at the end of the year, after our year-end fundraising, we will be drawing a name, and someone will get this one-of-a-kind original Cecil Bernard painting that is, by the way, sort of a facsimile or edition, whatever you want to call it in the art world, I don't know, but of our logo. So he has actually done a series of paintings around the If You Are My Brothers theme. So we're hoping at some point during one of our community engagement opportunities where we did showcase the one behind me, but we're hoping to showcase the entire series of paintings at maybe we'll have a showing or something at sooner than later. Um, so that's all that we have. We have other things available when you do make a contribution. You can also make a contribution to the Ralph Franklin Prostate Cancer Research Fund. We've partnered with the Cancer Center for Research and Therapeutic Development over at Clark Atlanta University. Let me tell you something about CCRTD right quick, since I got the mic tonight. Um, CCRTD is one of the only cancer research centers in the country that's specifically dedicated to researching prostate cancer in African American men or men of color. And that's one of the things they do. They do overall prostate cancer research too, but they're trying to find if there's a link, obviously, between it being more aggressive, heredity, those kinds of things. So young minds doing wonderful work. Ralph was all about research. He felt like, that was what would save his life, is going from one innovation to the next until this thing is cured. We're on that path. So we've set up a fund in Ralph's name through CCRTD and Clark Atlanta University. So we're raising, I think, to endow it is $50,000. We're getting there. We're getting some contributions. You can do that online, and you can just say, I want my contribution to go to the Ralph Franklin Prostate Cancer Research Fund. So we want to thank you in advance for making that contribution. You can support just what we do with our community engagement work. You can support the podcast. You can also support the documentary, as we are redoing the documentary and then posting that now in post-production. So there are different ways for you to get involved. And we hope you'll take the opportunity by going to ifyouaremybrothers.org and making that financial commitment, particularly now, end of the year. It is tax deductible. So we want to thank you in advance for that. Now, finally, I'm getting to the end. The audio version of this episode will be available next Tuesday on Apple, barring any issues, Apple, Spotify, and all the major podcast platforms. All episodes are archived on our YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube If You Are My Brothers. You can find us there, or you can go to our website, click on the link, and it'll take you to our YouTube channel. So special thanks to our producer, Danny Garcia Pozo, and to also Zach Reynolds at Borkhouse Productions for our opening. And remember, this podcast, again, is not a replacement for medical advice. Always talk to your healthcare provider about your health. Just want to make sure we mention that. Now, join us for our next episode. That's going to be Thursday, November 6th at 7 p.m. Eastern for anxiety, reoccurrence, and the unknown, coping with prostate cancer. Now, we'll explore the invisible struggles, the anxiety of watching and waiting, the sleepless nights before treatment. Oof, I remember that. The fear of recurrence, which I'm kind of dealing with now, and the silent toll of side effects, and how, and at the end of the day, how we cope and what we can do to cope. So that's going to be on the next episode of If You Are My Brothers. Now, If You Are My Brothers is a project of Straight Street Media, and you can learn more about Straight Street Media at straightstreetmedia.org. So until next time, if you are my brothers, you will share this message. And we want to say we're keeping the Moffett family in our prayers. And David, thank you for all the work and advocacy that you do. Take care. Stay healthy. We'll see you next time. Peace.